if you're genuinely curious, you're probably going to have a great podcast. What does it take to do that? And what are some of the pitfalls in that? This week's guest, truly, truly amazing. And it's a privilege to have Tommy on the show. You definitely want to stay tuned. Tommy, thanks for coming on today. Your background is, it's part of what caught my eye and part of why I wanted to have you on is not only are you a podcaster, but you're an outdoorsman, but you're this scientific outdoorsman. And a lot of outdoorsmen, I mean, most are big fans of what they do. They get heavily involved, and I can see that you have taken that to the nth degree, where now you are the one that is going to read not just the articles, you're going to read the scientific papers, and then your guests are going to be the scientists that wrote those papers, because you're going to be like, hey, I've got questions. How did the podcast come out of that for you? How did that start?
Oh, the start is in blogs. You remember, people? There were these things called blogs. So I'm based in Ireland, but I came from Poland. So that blog was when I was still in Poland, and that was blog about angling. Right, I was an angler. I was catching fish, and it all started. Some of you may remember there was like a beautiful program called Picasa for cataloging photos, and I had the photos of my fish that I caught in that program, and there was like a little button in there that says blog, and I was like, what the hell is blog? I don't even know. I'm gonna click this, and it created the website for me, and it's just like, I was like, oh, this is pretty cool. So I started blogging, and fast forward number of years, I moved to Ireland, and I was keep blogging, and it was great. Good old times when organic discoverability, there was a time when you could type in Google River Shannon, and my blog was in the first place in Google, right? These were the times. So when
the good old days.
The good old days of organic discoverability, right? But the blog was in Polish. And so because I was here and my friends were English speaking in Ireland, I thought I want to do something that I could go to the audience, English speaking audience. And obviously, for international, it is easier to speak than write. So then it was this other thing called podcasting. It's like, okay, let's do the podcast. And so that's how the podcast started, and I thought that the podcast will be a little bit like my blog, where I just talking with my buddies, we go fishing, and it's like, oh, this big fish, like whatever. So that's how it started. And the title, the title of the podcast was Tommy's Outdoors at the time, right? And so it was fine. We were talking about different things, and I always was interested in this sort of like a conservation angle, right? Like even since I was a small kid, I was wondering, like, when there is this river and there are fish in the river and people are catching those fish, how come we not run out of them? Right? How does it work? So that was
who's making more fish.
Yeah. So it was I know who's making more fish, but how come we ensure that those who are taking those fish are not doing that quicker than those fish actually making
come back?
Yeah. So that was my angle, that I always had that in me. And then there was like a one moment that I like in hindsight recall, where we were on social media. Back in the day, we had this lovely site called Twitter, where someone posted a photo of a skate caught by the angler with a tag. And one of the officers in environmental NGOs was like, oh, this is useless. Why you harming the fish and so on. And then because I was quite experienced angler at the time, I said, hey, no, actually those tags, they're going into the central database, and that constitutes the data that can be used for scientific research and da. And so we had a little bit of back and forth between like whether it's useful or is it just harming a fish. And I noticed there was a scientific program called Sea Monitor. I think it was Sea Monitor. I've done so many of them. So anyway, so I talk to those people and say, hey, you have a part of that program that you're tagging fish. Would you like to come on a podcast and discuss that issue, right? Because that was my thing. I was picking up a problem somewhere I found on the social media and said, hey, let's have an expert on and discuss that topic and have some sort of a understanding what are we talking about. And so I got them on, we had a conversation, and after podcast recording, the project manager of that scientific project contacted me and said, like, hey, Tommy, we actually have this is like one work package of this program, and we have like 6 work packages, and we have a lot of scientists that are just itching to do like a science communication. Would you like to have them on the podcast? And I go, yes. So we done 4 or 6 episodes for this program. And as soon as we were done, there was like another one. Hey, I heard that you've done the podcast for this program. We're running a different one on the, bugs and this. Like, would you like? And it turns out that there's like a huge demand from scientific community to go out and communicate in a language like people speak, And so I started getting invited on the scientific conferences and so on. I remember, like, one gentleman on the scientific conference, he goes to me and said, like, Tommy, we boring ourselves with these conferences. Like, we just write papers. It's like, nobody reads this thing. Like, we need, because, I'm coming from the perspective of like a naivety. It's like, whoa, really, right? And sometimes, I think that what makes me relatable to the audience, that sometimes I know the question, but I'm just playing devil's advocate sometimes, or just asking question, like people usually ask this question, what is your answer to that? So there was more and more this angle, and at some point I decided, like, Tommy's Outdoors is not really a name that works, because it's not about Tommy's and it's not about outdoors, and that's how I rebranded the show to Conservation and Science, because that's really is. So it's Conservation and Science. So Tommy's Outdoors is like a publisher, but the title of the podcast is Conservation and Science, because that really explains well what I do. And, like I try, like, you heard my tagline, I'm trying to bring diverse perspectives. Yes. And sometimes I feel like I upsetting half of my audience with every guest. How can you talk to this guy, right? And how can you talk, like, why are you giving platform to this? It's like, it is great because, one of the listeners from the, not that early days, but, a couple years ago, he said, like, you make us listen to people we may have not listened to otherwise. And I go like, yes, this is exactly what I want to do. I want to expose people to different ideas, to different points of view, because the dialogue that we have right now in social media it's just pointless. It's just a shouting match. And then when you start talking, and you can have like a long form podcast, right? You can have this prolonged discussion, and you can poke them a little bit, coming from the perspective of like I said, that was a journalist symposium in Paris. There was like a journalist symposium on sustainable use of wildlife resources, right? And everybody. So I was invited there as a podcaster. It was journalists and like other people, sure. and I was the podcast guy, and I was
the podcast guy.
Yeah, right. And so I was talking to what I do and like why the podcast and so on, and I said something that I didn't even notice at the time. But Rob York, who was well known, like he considered himself a dialogue broker. He picked up on it that I said that I'm asking hard questions, I'm asking difficult questions in a friendly manner, and I think that is another thing. When you have this podcast and you have this relation, and you know where you're at. I know it's remote, right? But you kind of know where you're at. And so that gives the avenue to ask all those hard questions. Like I say early, like be a devil's advocate, but in a friendly manner. And I think that advances discussion, that advances the conversation, that people can acknowledge more nuanced point of view, sometimes where on a Facebook or Twitter discussion they wouldn't, right? Because it's a different dynamic. So anyway, that's probably too long of an answer to your question, how it started and how it's going.
No, that's amazing. And to me, there's a couple of pieces in there that we'll kind of come back to and revisit. I love the bit of a discourse that you talk about in there, because to me, I dislike when I turn on a podcast and it is one person asking questions and the other person sitting there just smiling and nodding their head. It's supposed to be a discussion. There's supposed to be points. I'm supposed to learn from this. I don't want to go back to fourth grade and just get lectured. I didn't do well then. I did not do well in fourth grade. I don't want to go back to that. That being said, I know you covered a couple of points where you kind of saw where it really started to grow a bit. And like, part of it was, okay, I know the thing that I love about it is you started with this being kind of for you. It was a way for you to broadcast information to friends, educate some friends and those that are around you. When what was the thing where you started to notice some guests coming on and all of a sudden you're like, oh, this is serious. I'm the podcast guy. When did that click for you?
Yeah, I think that was the moment where different scientific projects, like managers of those scientific projects, started coming to me, and professors from universities started saying like, "Hey, we have this excellent paper, or we have a great student," and I started getting in, and it was like, holy crap, I'm getting invited somewhere, and like a hunting organization invited me and they paid for a hotel so I can stay and attend their event. It's like, whoa, like, you expecting me to, like, no, don't do anything, just be inviting you. It's like, oh shit, right? So that was the moment where it kind of occurred to me that what I'm doing, there's a value, and like people see the value in it. And it was maybe not surprising, but it was more of a nice thing that I am not like taking sides. I'm not like a one thing. I'm not like a pro like only hunters and all these are bunny huggers, and or like all the hunters are just the killers, and we need to like, no, I'm gonna talk. So I have on the show people from environmental NGOs. I had on the show scientists. I have on the show people who you can only describe as trophy hunters, and we have a conversation. And sometimes you'll be surprised what you hear from those people, that you would say like, oh, I would never thought they're gonna say that. And I think that this opens the door for other people to actually be exposed to different opinions.
Is your podcast not getting the results you hoped for? Are you feeling stuck and unsure how to grow your audience or make a real impact? We get it. Podcasting can be a challenge, but with the right strategies, it can be an incredibly powerful tool. That's why we're offering our free no-pitch podcast consultation. We'll spend 30 minutes with you identifying areas for improvement on anything from optimizing your audio or video quality to developing a content strategy that resonates with your customers. If you're ready to unleash your podcast's full potential, visit the link in our show notes to schedule your free consultation. Space is limited, so sign up today so we can help you create a podcast that truly shines. That makes sense. That's interesting, because I don't know of many other podcasts that have like both sides on all the time, and that's an interesting piece with that. That being said, I mean, you started to allude to it some with like, hey, a free hotel is always a bonus. Like anywhere, get out of the house, go someplace new, and I don't have to pay for it. Yes, please, all the time. That being said, like, what's been you don't necessarily have a business necessarily around this quite yet, but to me, and I say quite yet because obviously I know that could be down the future or whatever, but like what's been the big return on investment that you're seeing, and why does like how does that keep you going in the podcast? Because look, I mean, no one wants to just sit here and talk into the microphone for their health. The people that do want to just sit and talk into the microphone are the ones that I typically don't want to listen to. So there's a purpose behind yours. How do you get the return on the time and all the effort that you're putting in?
Yeah. So first, I would say that last year was probably the first year where actually podcast made a profit. So
congratulations. Awesome.
So that's a one thing. It was a long time coming, but the question is very much a good one. And I suppose, going into all this area of pod fade, and we going into all this area of the creator fit. And I think this is excellent fit for me as a creator, because like we started, how this started. These are topics that always interested me. And so I take it like a twofold, right? Number one, it became some sort of a mission, right? Like almost a mission. If there is a problem that is just discussed on social media, for example, and it's not that simple. One of them is like lowering protection status of wolves in the EU, where some people talking like this is worst thing ever, is going to be wholesale slaughter of wolves. And then other people, when they lower their protection status, like FACE, which is like a European hunting organization, go like, good news for wolves, right? It's like, how is this good news for wolves, right? Like they're going to get shot. But this is like, there's a lot of nuance in that, and there's a lot of complexity. And I think that this is sort of my mission, to present all the points of view and say like, hey, the things are usually not that simple. And there are people who are affected, and there are real risk for that move. And that move was done because of these things, not what you think it was done. And this is sort of a mission, right? So that's the one part of it. Another part of that is that, for example, I had recorded an episode with a Canadian scientist who spent 40 years researching polar bears, right? Like absolutely top of the heap, world-class scientist, 40 years on research on polar bears. He was darting them, flying helicopters, analyzing data in the computers. He, if he doesn't know something about polar bears, it's not worth knowing. And I spent like an hour and a half talking to the guy. How could I do that otherwise? Do you know what I mean? It was like, I couldn't like ring him up and say like, hey, do you want to talk with me for an hour about polar bears, right? And the guy's like, oh, who is this guy? Like, weirdo. So having that podcast opens the door. It's like, hey, let's talk about polar bears and like, what is really the situation with the climate, and, how bad is it, and so on. And you get this guy, and he's like, as you can imagine, he's absolutely passionate about polar bears.
Yeah.
You can see he's just lighting up. And it's like, hey, I have this like a source of knowledge, like a, best in the world, that I can just have this conversation. I can ask any questions that I want and see and he's going to tell me a story. So this is like, this is why I'm sometimes so, annoyed at the conversation in the podcasting world. Like, what is the best length of the podcast? And it's like, I don't care. I have such an opportunity. I'm not going to end up that conversation because of the time of your commute. Hit the pause and, restart tomorrow. I'm just having the conversation. So, okay. And so obviously this is a little bit tongue in cheek. There is a bit of truth in that as well. I understand that this is important to not bore your listeners to death and so on and so forth. But this is like another like an intangible element that keeps me going. It's just access to all those people and being able to feed off their knowledge and learn. And on top of that, you get feedback from other people who say, oh, this is great. I didn't realize this is working that way. So, I guess it on a very like a big, grandiose level, it goes to the like, what are we doing here in this world, right? And if you have opportunity to advance the knowledge and, change mind of somebody, or at least get them to have like a more nuanced approach or more nuanced view on something, or even, like something that is very, very, it's not happening these days. Something like, I don't know. I have no opinion. I don't know. When was the last time you heard someone said that? Right?
I agree. It's tough to get to that point because there's things where I actually enjoy it when someone asks me a question like, well, what's your opinion on this? And I'm like, don't have one. No. And I'm like, they're like, well, what do you mean? And I'm like,
how refreshing.
Right. I literally am so uneducated on this that I don't want to venture a guess. I don't want to stick my foot in my mouth. I get that. I kind of want to go back to the wolves thing. It really struck me when you said hey, this is the worst thing that can happen for wolves. And some people are like, hey, killing wolves is the best thing that can happen to them. And because the irony in that, and I'm going to talk to something adjacent about that. And I kind of want to ask you about something adjacent with that. Mm-hmm. When you are covering both sides of the story, you're obviously, I mean, I know you're here to learn, but I'm assuming that you're going to have a leaning one way or another in some of these issues. Mm-hmm. How do you try to keep the spin out of that? Because to me, like the wolves thing is one of those things where I realized as soon as you said it, I'm like, this is a nuanced discussion. Like killing some wolves could actually be good for them, not necessarily the ones that die, but it can be good for the population overall. So how do you keep your prejudices or spin out of it in order to make sure that, like, hey, I am presenting just this facts, and obviously you're going to get the opinion of the person on the other end, but how do you keep yours out of it?
Yeah. Good question. You know, to some extent, maybe not to some extent, you can cut that out. I think it is impossible to keep your bias completely out of it, no matter what you do. So I guess I'm making no apologies. I am coming from the perspective of an outdoorsman. I'm coming from the perspective of a hunter and angler, but I also coming from the perspective of environmentalists, because I want, I want nature to flourish, and I want, to be able to go and enjoy. So this is the angle that I'm coming from. Now, to balance the conversation, I do two things. One, the most obvious thing, it is that I'm inviting guests from different perspectives. So for example, it was many years ago, I've done an episode about conflict between fishermen and seals. And I had a person from seal rescue organization, right? Very emotional language, like, seals deserve second chance, like all of these things. And then I had a scientist, very factual and matter of fact, and we glued a tag, and seal dives this and this, that happened. And then I had a trawler man, right, whose opinion is like, shoot the bastards. Right? Now, the difficulty with that is that those episodes are published, weeks, sometimes months apart, which is sort of like addresses the regular listener, because the listener who just tunes out to this one may go, oh, right, this is right. And so they might miss that aspect, but hopefully they stay around and they will go there. I tried also doing episodes, so for example, about the wolves, like as soon as that thing, I knew it's going to go down, I recorded an episode when I had 5 guests on a podcast. A hunter, a goat breeder, a scientist, an AGO, and five experts in one episode.
That was a busy day.
Well, edit was busy. Yeah, it was. So I do those on occasions. You're a podcast editing company, so you know how much you're effectively putting work for 5 episodes or 3 episodes, and that results in 1 episode.
Yep.
Especially that I am talking with them separately. And I think, I could potentially do, and I had this feedback, why, when you do the debate, do the debate, Tommy, do the debate. And, we talked before you hit a record, I'm in a corporate environment. So I think I could handle the meeting and conversation and moderate that. But I think the people involved wouldn't be at their best.
No. I agree.
So, because at some point you start to, you just want to win the argument, and then it goes downhill from that point. So, I talk with them separately. I get their points and then putting the episode. So this is how I try to manage that. And like and like I said, sometimes I get heat. Like I've done an episode about the invasive species of deer in Ireland, and it was like one guy who was from the hunting organization, and then there was another like an environmentalist who is regenerating a forest, right? And some people from other hunting organizations, they came back angry at me. Like, why are you giving platform to this guy? It's like, hey, your guy had as much time as the other one to put their points. Like, why are you not telling me like, oh, great that you got the other guy, right? Yeah. You upset at me that, well, maybe in the grand scheme of things, your guy's argument were just shit, right? I don't know. Maybe that's how. But this is how I try to. So to answer your question, like this is how I'm doing this. I just think like if anyone has interesting perspective or done something, wrote a book, shoot a film, done the research and has a scientific papers on it or something like that, they have a lot to talk about it, and they can answer questions outside of the cliche and outside like, oh, I think, I tell you what we should do about wolves, right? So this is how I try to do this, but at the same time, I'm not pretending. I'm not, I often say like, okay, my take on this is such. Right. And on quite a few occasions, guests say like, well, I disagree with you because I think da 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 da. And that's perfectly fine. Right. We don't have to resolve that problem. Like, this is my point. This is your point. And my next thing that I want to ask you about is something else. So this is how I deal with that.
I love that. That's an interesting piece to that. And I think it's advice that I think a lot of people can take, because so many people approach their podcast looking for the yes person instead of looking for the education person, is the big thing. With that, you've been doing this for a fair bit of time. I am sure there is a big lesson about podcasting that you have learned, or a mistake that you have made where you're like, oh, don't do that. What is like the big mistake or the big lesson that moved you ahead? Like, what's that big piece that you feel you've really taken?
Can I have two?
I guess.
Okay, I give you two.
We'll count it as a bonus one. There's one and a bonus.
Yeah, one and a bonus. You can decide which one is main one and which one is a bonus. So I put it in a chronological order. Okay, the first big mistake that I've done is that for the first probably 4 or 5 years of making podcasts, I didn't speak to another podcaster. I'm just doing my podcast. I'm just like talking with like things are good, right? And then it was like, oh, there's like a meeting of podcasters. It's like, I was like, maybe I joined, right? And I like an online meeting, and I joined. It's like, holy shit! There's like whole industry. There's like people doing stuff. There's like, right? And so that is something that I think that held back my podcast at least these 4 or 5 years. If I started talking earlier to other people who are doing podcasts, and they already figure out things, or maybe they are aware of things that I wasn't even aware. So that was a big thing. I was just doing my thing. I was just happy. Like I said, it was a mission. I was happy that I have an opportunity to talk with those people. It was great. And that was like, wow, if I, talked earlier, I could start making changes and adjustment to my show, sooner. And that hopefully would be the best thing. The other advice, and I gotta say, it's not really my advice. That's an advice that I heard from the guy who you probably know. I heard about this. His name is Adam Shively. I think he has a podcast called Podcasting Business School or something like that. And he said, and like, I'm here to tell you that it works. That at some point as a podcasters, we start getting a lot of offers, right? Oh, we have this great guest for you. Oh, we have this guy. Oh, we have like whatever, right? And so what Adam said, and I just implemented from day one. Well, from day one, I heard that from him, was like, if any given guest like matches, fits your show, clears the bar that you potentially could do it, You go and say like, hey, yes, sure, this is great. Standard guesting fee, $100 or €100. And it turned out that people started to pay. They want to be on a show. And you just needed to ask. You just needed to ask to get some money for your work. And it turns out that, 50%, 40%, I don't know how many, like they all of a sudden say like, yeah, sure. And it's like, oh, wow, this is so then obviously you're building on that and you're just preparing like a proper offer. And so then you can send something and say like, hey, this is standard guesting fee, but this is what I'm offering. And this is my previous guest. And this is like whatever, right? So you start to build that, I hate to say it business, but sort of like, cover your costs for your effort and all the other stuff. And it turns out that when the people, and obviously, there are people who say, you talk to me on Podmatch, right? And the Podmatch is like people going in and say like, oh, I have this, I'm representing my client is this and that, right? And it's like, my thing is like, when you mention client, that means there is a budget. I want a slice of that pie. Right? It's as simple as that. Like the moment you mention client, it's a business relation. Therefore, my service, like I'm not, why would I do the work for you for free? And that's a big learning. And I think that would be especially in Europe, right? Because I'm based in Europe, I'm based in Ireland. I think that the podcasting market, let's say it, is a little bit different in Europe than it is in North America. Because like in North America, people are used to paying for everything. So it doesn't go like that thing like, oh, just, right? It's more natural. In Europe, there's still this expectation of like, oh, well, you're a guy with a complicated hobby. But I think the more podcasters, as a matter of, and I'm not saying it has to be €100. It may be, here's my buy me a coffee page.
Sure.
Right? Or something. But for the good of all podcasters in the world, don't be that person who is willing to do the work for free, because there's a lot of work. You're paying for hosting, you're paying for your software, you have your microphone, you record an episode, you edit it, you put it out, you do some social. You may have
a producer.
Right. You may have a producer, right? So there is a lot of going on. And so I don't see like why someone just rolls in and says like, oh, I have a client, do that work for free for me. It's like, hell no.
I love that.
So that's my second advice. Value to the podcasters, value your work. And if the people are coming to you, they probably value what you do. And you need to find out, what is your price and so on. But don't do the job for free. And again, I understand in the early days. Right? People are just like, oh, Jesus, who is going to be my guest? I have a guest, right? But then those shows tends to like, just, I'm going to talk to anybody about anything. So as soon as you get to the point where like, okay, this is the profile of my show. This is who I talking with and about. And so then when you have someone who matches that bar, it's like, okay, fine, great. Let's do this. This is what I offer. You come, so that's my second advice.
That's a great piece of advice. The other thing that I was thinking of behind that too is the piece that if someone's willing to pay to be on the podcast, they see the value in what you're doing. And if they see the value in what you're doing, they're probably bringing a value too. Mm-hmm. Someone that's not serious about it, that's not serious about like putting themselves out there or serious about becoming a speaker or getting the notoriety isn't going to put their wallet behind it. Like you're making sure that it's an investment for someone instead of just hey, I really like to hear myself talk and I'm going to do it on your show. Because
precisely. Yeah.
We have seen those people. So where like the short term, what's the near term future for the podcast?
I keep doing what I'm doing. I have this idea of I'm big on the it's called marginal gains and the little improvements and the little changes and like we talked about, like how can I save 15 minutes on editing an episode? That's in 15 minutes that I can put into something else. And how can I save a few dollars or few euro on hosting, on the newsletter, right? Maybe I don't need a pro newsletter, right? Very like a pro subscription, because the pro subscription, it has all these problems, and these problems are actually this pro thing. So I actually paying to have a problem that I can solve. Maybe I just, maybe I can do with one automation, not 7 for my newsletter. So those little improvements. Look, I definitely see the value in, like you mentioned, synergy of the values. If somebody has a book, if somebody has a film, if somebody does the research, if somebody goes and does something interesting for the environment, that is something when we can do the collaboration, or like I said, those things, to those things budgets are attached. And this is not to, I'm not planning to quit my day job anytime soon. But, it is nice if you get your Adobe license covered. It's nice if you get your hosting thing covered. And so even then you can go for, have a free lunch or something like that. So I think I'm going to continue on the path that I'm in. And the interesting thing is that with those, let's call them commercial engagements, that gives me still freedom to go in and talk to scientists, do the interesting research. They're not gonna pay for any of those things, because right. they're very poor. And there's like, contrary to some people's belief, there is like not really a lot of money in science.
No.
And a scientist, and like I was talking with a gentleman. They had a project of eradication of feral ferrets on the island, who were just decimating birds and so on, right? And he said, like, okay, this project was like so many millions of euro, right? And someone's like, whoa, holy shit, this many millions of euros, these scientists are getting rich. But then he's like, yeah, but the project is like 5 years. There's like 20 people. We need to get all this equipment, and we're living on the island, right? And then it turns out like, whoa, shit, like 5 million is actually nothing.
Right.
For this project. So I like to do that too, because like I said, this is like this part of a mission that I have to just expose people to more nuanced views and help them. I don't want to say educate them, because it sometimes may feel like it's a little bit of a patronizing, or like, sure, go educate yourself, right? But just open the avenue. It's like, oh, I never thought about that, and that is my mission. So this is a short term. Long term, I have an idea to launch another podcast, which would be strictly hardcore, aimed at scientific community, especially at the early stage, early career scientists, early postdocs, or even PhD students. So this is why I do all these optimizations, to carve out a little bit of time, and I know I can do it. I know there is a potential. I'm just waiting to pull the trigger to know that I have enough time to do this. So that's gonna be less of like a wider audience. It's gonna be like a hardcore scientific academic community. So that is a long-term addition to Conservation and Science podcast, where Conservation and Science will be sort of like a mainstream vehicle to which we will have attached this very specialized, let's call it, tool for early career scientists.
It's funny because like podcasts, I feel like are like, I have motorcycles. Notice I said more than one motorcycle. Most people that go bowling have more than one bowling ball, or podcasters, we're no different. We can't just have one. We've got to. I've got the podcast that I do for this, and then I've got the podcast that I do for this. Tommy,
it's my third one. It's my third one. This one, just
right. Cutting back to 3 is. I really appreciate the time, and the insights with this are brilliant. I know you looked up a few times to see me typing, and I'm typing some. I got like 7 or 8 points that I have to somehow figure out how to summarize at the end here. It's you a ton of brilliance there. So thank you. Where can people find you? Your stuff is, I mean, I obviously watched a few before I had you on the show. It is really, really good. Where can people find you?
Thank you. Well, on the very platform they listening to this podcast right now, listening or watching. As soon as you stop, just go to that search box and type conservation and science. Then you find me.
Love that. Thank you once again so much. I appreciate the knowledge. Guys, I'm going to summarize this. I'm going to see if I don't get a headache doing this because a lot of good information, and I will be right back. Tommy and I spent probably 15, 20 minutes talking before the show and another probably 10, 15 minutes talking after the show. I truly enjoyed just talking with him, and we're going to kind of get into some of that. And I mean, he mentioned like the access to people, and we're going to talk about that. You're going to see me look down at my computer here if you're watching the video on this, because I took some notes with his show. I take notes with most of the shows. I got a lot to cover today. So let's dive right into it. One of the first things that I noticed, he started looking at topics that he found on social media. What are people talking about on social media that's related to your industry? It is a great, great, great way to find topics. Once again, people are already talking about it, so you're ensuring the relevancy. Now, depending on the schedule that you're on and the production schedule that you're on, you need to be careful with when that's going to come out. But in the same sense, if you're only a couple of weeks out, jump on that. I don't want to call it a trend, but yes, jump on that trend. The big piece with that is it's answer the questions that people are asking. Answer those questions, and you have a built-in audience. We talk about how you add value to people's day. That's what's going to make them listen to your podcast. If you answer their questions, guess what? It's a no-brainer. It's right there. It's ready to go. You're giving them the exact information that they want. The other thing that I loved that he goes into is he tries to cover both sides of the story. It's something that most people don't cover. I get it. And I mean, let's talk in so many realms right now. People want, like, social media is an echo chamber. It shows you exactly what you want to hear. It doesn't typically give you conflicting opinions. Because let's face it, most of us don't like to hear that we're wrong or don't like to hear that something else may work, I guess I would say. He looks at both sides of the story. I mean, the wolves example I loved, like, this is going to decimate wolves. This is going to be amazing for wolves. Why not hear both sides of that story? And that way your audience can make their own opinion. Now, the thing I'm going to say with that is sometimes it is difficult to get people to listen to both sides of the story. But when you find an audience that wants to do that, it truly does work. It can be absolutely amazing. Once again, it builds that connection. Now, he's got an audience now that really wants to hear both sides of the story, even though it may make them a little bit uncomfortable. He's able to do that because the quote this is the take-home quote. He's able to ask difficult questions in an easy, friendly manner. He's not asking difficult questions like in a I gotcha sense. He's asking questions of people in a friendly manner, like, hey, I'm curious. This, once again, it goes back to what I talked about, like, for the intro to the show, being genuinely curious. He's got his opinions on things. He's a hunter. He's a sportsman. He loves the outdoors, but he's also a conservationist. So he wants to make sure that we've got the outdoors and those resources for years and years and years to come. So he's trying to balance both sides of the conservation and the sportsman. He does that in a way that is curious because he genuinely just wants to learn more. To me, I've talked about this too, it's in some cases the success of Joe Rogan. He's curious. He wants to learn about stuff. The Chris Williamson in the Modern Wisdom podcast, he's asking questions much, much, much more than he talks. And that's because he's genuinely curious. He wants to learn. Tommy's the same way. He's got high level scientists, like world renowned scientists on his show that he gets to ask questions of. Isn't that amazing? I mean, if you can think of the top people in your industry, if you can just sit down with them and ask them questions, how do I do this better? How do I do that better? How do I learn more about this? It truly is an amazing thing to be able to do that. That, to me, really speaks to the last episode that I had. We'll put that in the show notes, of course. Dave Jackson, he was on the podcast. Dave Jackson is, I would equate him to being the guy that studied polar bears. Dave Jackson has a huge knowledge of podcasting. And that's why I was truly grateful to have him on the show. Without the podcast, I would never have access to someone like a Dave Jackson. The education driver for me is one that we always like to talk about. Like if you're trying to market your business, if you're trying to make a business branded podcast, that education piece is such a key. That is your value driver. That is what is going to make people listen to you. You are offering them that value of education. Once again, you guys, I know have heard me say this. I say this in the class that we teach all the time. People are giving you their most valuable thing, their time. Now, granted, they may be splitting it between other things. They may be driving the car. They may be doing other things, but people are still giving you their most valuable resource, their time. How are you going to give them a value in return? Educating them is one amazing way to do it. If you can pile some entertainment on top of that, you're going to be in great, great, great shape. As he talked about doing the conflicting sides with things, he talked about how people so often want to win the argument instead of just making their point clear. It's something to think about when you're talking about something that may be controversial. Don't be trying to win the argument. Just state your case, state what supports your items. And this is the same when it comes to marketing. Like, tell people what are the benefits from this, why they should be doing this. It's not an argument. It's just, here's the facts as I see them. Makes it much, much easier. And once again, it brings down some of those defenses. He also said, learn from other podcasters. And boy, what a great tip that is. Why do you think I have this show? It's so I can learn from other podcasters. I mean, to me, truly, what I learned from Tommy and so much of this was absolutely awesome. I truly appreciate his time and all the effort that he's put into his podcast. So we all can learn from that. The building with intention. So like I said, with guests, him asking for some money for some guests. I truly love that. We get approached all the time. Hey, I would love to be a guest on your show. I get it all the time from marketing people, from other people that are like, I want to be a guest on your show. And I'm like, well, okay, we talk about podcasting. We talk about building branded podcasts for marketing for companies. That's what we talk about. And they're like, oh, yeah, I can talk about that. And I'm like, how? And once again, it really comes down to, in so many cases, people just they want on your platform because they want to use your microphone. I get it. I can understand why they want to do that. You need to make sure that it serves you. And that's why asking for a couple of dollars, I don't think is a big deal. Now, the things that I want to say about the flip side of that is it still needs to fit your audience, and B, it still needs to fit your topic. Don't just say because someone's willing to give you $400 to be a guest on your podcast. Don't be like, yeah, we'll talk about anything. There's a lot of topics that we're just not going to talk about on our podcast. We talk about podcasting. We talk about how to get better as a podcaster. I want to stick with those people. The ability to charge a few dollars for that to help cover some of your costs isn't a bad thing. Because once again, you have something of value as long as you are making sure it's valuable to your listeners. With all that being said, Once again, make sure you go follow Tommy, especially if you're into anything outdoors or conservation. I've listened to a number of his podcasts, and that's why I wanted to have him on the show. He's a great host. He has on some truly, interesting individuals that, once again, there's these scientific papers that these people are looking at, and they need to get their message out. So if you like the outdoors at all, he is definitely one that you should go check out. Do me a favor, take care of yourself. If you can, take care of someone else too. I will see you very, very soon. Creating engaging content can feel overwhelming, but it doesn't have to be. That's why I'm excited to share our Stomping Podcasting newsletter. You'll get actionable insights and expert tips straight to your inbox. These are to help you maximize your video marketing and podcasting return on investment. Head over to the show notes and click the link to subscribe to our free newsletter. Don't miss out on this opportunity to become a video marketing and podcasting pro.